The unsettling fascination. Daniel Johnson, a xenobiologist from Earth, stood in the midst of the grand hall of the Arcturian Research Facility, feeling a mixture of awe and trepidation. The Arcturians, an advanced and enigmatic alien race, had agreed to host the first human delegation on their planet. This mission was critical for establishing diplomatic ties and scientific collaboration between the two species. However, Daniel had an additional challenge. Ixia. Ixia was a high-ranking Arcturian with jet-black feathers, indicating her elite status. She had an unsettling fascination with human anatomy, and her constant inappropriate touching made it difficult for Daniel to maintain his professionalism. Her latest demand had been the most intrusive yet. "Now show me how your reproductive organ functions," Ixia had demanded, her clawed hand groping at his crotch. Daniel had batted her hand away, his patience wearing thin. He needed to establish clear boundaries if this mission was to succeed. The Arcturian society was hierarchical, and liaising with someone like Ixia granted him high-level research access. However, her lurid curiosity was making it impossible to focus on science. "Ixia, we need to keep our interactions professional," Daniel said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Our mission here is to study and collaborate, not to satisfy personal curiosities." Ixia tilted her head, her violet eyes studying him intently. "But your bodies are so different, so fascinating. How can you expect me to ignore such curiosity?" "By understanding that there are limits," Daniel replied firmly. "We are here to learn from each other, not to objectify one another." She seemed to consider his words, her feathers ruffling slightly in thought. "Very well, Daniel. I will respect your boundaries. For now." Relieved, Daniel nodded. "Thank you. Now, let's get back to the research." Dark discoveries. Days turned into weeks as Daniel and the human delegation worked alongside the Arcturian scientists. They marveled at the advanced technology and scientific breakthroughs of the Arcturians, but Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Corvus, another high-ranking Arcturian, had been particularly secretive about certain aspects of their research. One evening, Corvus invited Daniel for a private tour of a restricted section of the facility. Daniel followed him through the sleek corridors, his heart pounding with a mix of excitement and unease. As they entered a dimly lit laboratory, Daniel's eyes widened in horror. Human bodies lay dissected on metal tables, their organs and tissues carefully labeled and preserved in jars. Computer screens displayed images of human DNA being spliced with Arcturian genes, creating grotesque hybrid embryos. "What the hell is this?" Daniel demanded, his voice shaking with anger and disgust. "You've been experimenting on my people, harvesting our organs and playing God with our DNA." Corvus remained calm, his jet-black feathers gleaming under the harsh laboratory lights. "You must understand, Daniel, that these experiments are necessary for the advancement of Arcturian science. Your species should be honored to contribute to our research." "Honored?" Daniel scoffed. "This is a violation of every ethical and moral code in the galaxy. When the other species find out what you've been doing here..." "They'll what?" Corvus interrupted, his tone suddenly conciliatory. "Perhaps I haven't been entirely forthcoming about the true purpose of our experiments. Allow me to show you." He led Daniel to a hidden chamber deep within the facility. Inside, rows of incubation tanks held Arcturian embryos in various stages of development. Many of them were deformed or lifeless, their genetic code riddled with mutations. "Our species is dying, Daniel," Corvus said solemnly. "A genetic mutation has left us infertile, unable to produce viable offspring. These experiments on humans and other species are our last hope for finding a compatible mate and ensuring the survival of the Arcturian race." Daniel's mind reeled at the revelation. Part of him felt a twinge of sympathy for the Arcturian plight, but he couldn't condone their methods. "I'm sorry, but I can't help you. What you're doing here is wrong, no matter the reason." Corvus's eyes narrowed, his tone turning menacing. "I'm afraid you don't have a choice, Daniel. Your genetic material is the key to our survival, and I will have it one way or another." Before Daniel could react, Corvus lunged at him, pinning him against the wall with surprising strength. His beak nuzzled Daniel's neck, his clawed hands roaming over the human's body with a perverse hunger. "Get off me!" Daniel shouted, struggling against Corvus's iron grip. But the Arcturian was relentless, his eyes blazing with mad desperation. The Rebel Alliance. Daniel thrashed and kicked, fighting against Corvus's iron grip. The Arcturian's claws dug into his skin as he tried to pin Daniel to the wall, but Daniel refused to be a victim. He slammed his knee into Corvus's groin, causing the alien to double over in pain. Daniel took advantage of the momentary distraction and shoved Corvus away, sending him crashing into a rack of beakers and test tubes. Glass shattered and chemicals spilled across the floor as Daniel made a break for the door. He ran through the twisting corridors of the research facility, his heart pounding in his chest. Alarms blared and red lights flashed, but Daniel didn't stop. He had to get out of this nightmare and find a way to contact his team back on Earth. As he burst out of the facility and into the alien city beyond, Daniel realized the true scope of the Arcturian crimes. The streets were lined with cages and pens, each one containing a human or alien prisoner. Some were bruised and bleeding, their eyes hollow with despair. Others cried out for help, their voices raw with pain and fear. Daniel's stomach churned as he saw the condition of the captives. Many had been subjected to horrific experiments, their bodies mutilated and their minds broken. He knew he couldn't leave them behind. He had to find a way to rescue them and expose the Arcturian twisted breeding program to the galaxy. As Daniel searched for a way off the planet, he heard whispers of a rebel group working to overthrow the Arcturian government. He sought them out, desperate for allies in his fight against Corvus and his kind. The rebels were wary at first, their black feathers ruffled with suspicion. But as Daniel shared his story and offered to help in their cause, they began to see him as a valuable asset. Together, they hatched a plan to infiltrate one of the breeding facilities and free the captives inside. Daniel's heart raced as they crept through the dark corridors, the stench of fear and desperation thick in the air. As they unlocked the cages and ushered the prisoners to safety, Daniel's eyes fell on a human woman huddled in the corner of her cell. Her name was Sarah, and she had been subjected to the worst of the Arcturian experiments. Her body was covered in scars and bruises, her eyes haunted by the horrors she had endured. Daniel helped her to her feet, promising to get her out of this hell. But as they made their escape, Corvus and his guards caught up to them. Laser blasts filled the air as the two sides clashed. Daniel fought with all his strength, but he was outnumbered and outgunned. He watched in horror as a blast caught Sarah in the chest, her body crumpling to the ground like a rag doll. Rage and grief consumed Daniel as he was dragged back to his cell, his body battered and his spirit broken. But as he sat in the darkness, a new resolve hardened in his heart. He would make the Arcturians pay for what they had done to Sarah and countless others. He would bring their crimes to light and watch their twisted empire crumble to dust. No matter the cost, he would have his revenge. The trial and the choice. Daniel stood before the Arcturian High Council, his hands bound in heavy shackles. The chamber was vast, with high ceilings and walls adorned with intricate carvings depicting the Arcturian history. The counselors perched on elevated seats, their black feathers gleaming in the dim light. The trial was a farce. The counselors hurled accusations at Daniel, twisting his actions to paint him as a dangerous criminal. They spoke of his attack on Corvus, his theft of Arcturian technology, and his incitement of rebellion among the lower castes. Daniel tried to defend himself, to expose the truth of the Arcturian cruel experiments, but his words fell on deaf ears. In the end, the verdict was inevitable. Daniel Johnson, you have been found guilty of crimes against the Arcturian people, the High Counselor declared, her voice cold and imperious. The sentence is death, to be carried out immediately. Daniel's heart raced as the guards grabbed his arms, dragging him towards the execution chamber. But before they could reach the door, Corvus stepped forward. "Wait," he said, his voice calm and measured. "I have a proposal." The High Counselor narrowed her eyes. "Speak quickly, Corvus. The human's fate is sealed." Corvus turned to Daniel, his gaze intense. "I offer you a choice. Mate with me, provide your genetic material for our breeding program, and I will use my influence to commute your sentence to life imprisonment. Refuse, and you will die here and now." Daniel's stomach churned at the thought of submitting to Corvus's twisted desires. He felt trapped, knowing that accepting Corvus's proposal meant a lifetime of imprisonment and violation. But the alternative was death. He swallowed hard, his voice barely above a whisper. "I accept your offer." Corvus smiled, a cruel twist of his beak. "Wise choice, human. Guards, bring him to my chambers. I will oversee his rehabilitation myself." As the guards dragged Daniel through the winding corridors of the government compound, he focused on the layout of the building, the position of the security checkpoints, anything that might aid in his escape. He had no intention of honoring his deal with Corvus. He would play along, bide his time, and strike when the moment was right. The escape plan. Corvus's chambers were opulent, with plush furnishings and walls lined with ancient Arcturian art. The air was heavy with the scent of exotic incense. Corvus dismissed the guards with a wave of his hand, and turned to Daniel with a hungry look in his eyes. "Strip," he commanded, his voice low and guttural. "I want to see my new mate in all his glory." Daniel hesitated, his heart pounding in his chest. He had to time this perfectly. As Corvus reached for him, Daniel lunged forward, slamming his knee into the Arcturian's groin. Corvus doubled over, his breath coming in sharp gasps. Daniel grabbed a heavy statuette from a nearby table and brought it down on Corvus's head once, twice, until the Arcturian crumpled to the floor, unconscious. With shaking hands, Daniel searched Corvus's robes, finding his security clearance card. He swiped it through the door panel and slipped out into the corridor, his heart racing. He had to move quickly before the guards realized what had happened. Using his knowledge of Arcturian physiology, Daniel targeted the pressure points and weak spots that would render the guards unconscious without raising the alarm. He made his way to the communication center, his mind racing with the message he needed to send. With trembling fingers, Daniel typed out a desperate plea to the human authorities, detailing the Arcturian crimes and the locations of the breeding facilities. He hit send just as the alarms began to blare throughout the compound. His time was up. The rebellion. Daniel raced through the streets of the Arcturian capital, dodging patrols and surveillance drones. He had to reach the rebel hideout, had to share the knowledge he had gained. When he finally arrived, breathless and exhausted, he found the rebels in a state of frenzy. "We've been planning this uprising for months," the rebel leader said, her eyes blazing with determination. "But we never had the inside knowledge we needed to strike at the heart of the government until now." With Daniel's information and the rebels' strength, they launched a coordinated attack on the breeding facilities and government compound. The battle was fierce, but the rebels fought with the fury of the oppressed, the determination of those with nothing left to lose. In the chaos of the fighting, Daniel confronted Corvus once again. But this time, something had changed in the Arcturian's eyes. He looked at the destruction around him, at the suffering and pain his people had caused, and something broke inside him. "What have we done?" he whispered, his voice raw with emotion. "How could we have been so blind, so cruel?" Together, Daniel and Corvus fought to destroy the breeding facilities and the twisted research that had started it all. They watched as the Arcturian government crumbled, as the lower castes rose up to claim their freedom. And as the smoke cleared and the dust settled, Daniel knew that his fight was far from over. There were still Arcturians out there who clung to their old ways, who would stop at nothing to rebuild their empire of cruelty and oppression. But for now, he could rest, could bask in the knowledge that he had struck a blow against the darkness, that he had saved countless lives from a fate worse than death. The road ahead would be long and hard, but with the rebels by his side, and the truth as his weapon, Daniel knew that he would never stop fighting for what was right. A new beginning. The smoke from the uprising still hung in the air as Daniel and Corvus surveyed the aftermath. The once pristine streets of the Arcturian capital were now littered with debris and the bodies of the fallen. The sounds of wailing and mourning echoed through the city as the Arcturian people grappled with the horrific revelations of their government's actions. "I can't believe it," a young Arcturian rebel said, his voice trembling. "How could they do this to us, to other species?" Daniel placed a hand on the young Arcturian's shoulder. "It's not your fault. Your government lied to you, manipulated you, but now you have a chance to make things right." As the rebels worked to establish a new government, Daniel and Corvus found themselves in the midst of heated debates and negotiations. Many Arcturians were eager to embrace change, to build a society based on equality and respect for all life. But others, still reeling from the shock of their species' impending extinction, clung to the belief that the breeding program had been necessary for their survival. "We cannot condemn our entire species to death," one Arcturian loyalist shouted during a particularly tense meeting. "The experiments were distasteful, yes, but they were our only hope." Corvus slammed his fist on the table, his black feathers bristling. "No, we cannot justify the torture and violation of sentient beings for our own gain. We must find another way, a way that doesn't compromise our morality." As the debates raged on, Daniel and Corvus worked tirelessly to bridge the gap between their two peoples. They organized joint projects and cultural exchanges, hoping to foster understanding and cooperation between humans and Arcturians. But just as progress was being made, a faction of Arcturian loyalists launched a brutal counter-rebellion. They stormed the government buildings, intent on restoring the old order and restarting the breeding program. Daniel and Corvus found themselves fighting side by side once again, this time against their own people. They battled their way through the loyalist forces, desperately trying to reach the hidden cache of genetic material that the loyalists needed to restart the experiments. In the end, it was Corvus who made the ultimate sacrifice. As Daniel lay pinned down by enemy fire, Corvus charged forward, igniting a series of explosives that destroyed the genetic cache and the loyalist forces along with it. Daniel crawled to Corvus's side, cradling the mortally wounded Arcturian in his arms. Blue blood seeped from Corvus's wounds, staining Daniel's hands and clothes. "I'm sorry," Corvus whispered, his voice weak, "for everything. I was so blinded by my own fear, my own desperation. I hope that our peoples can find a way to live together in peace." With a final shuddering breath, Corvus was gone. Daniel wept, his tears mingling with the blood and ash on his face. In the years that followed, the Arcturians worked tirelessly to atone for their past crimes. They shared their advanced technology and knowledge with the galactic community, working to improve the lives of all species. They established strict ethical guidelines for scientific research, ensuring that nothing like the breeding program could ever happen again. Daniel returned to Earth, hailed as a hero by both humans and Arcturians, but he was a changed man, haunted by the memories of those he had lost and the knowledge that there was still so much suffering in the universe. He dedicated his life to fighting against oppression and exploitation wherever he found it. And though the scars of his time among the Arcturians never fully healed, he found solace in the knowledge that he had made a difference, that he had fought for what was right. The story of Daniel and Corvus became legend, a cautionary tale of the dangers of unchecked ambition and the importance of valuing all life. And though the universe was vast and full of darkness, there were always those who fought for the light, who believed in a better tomorrow. Conclusion. Daniel stood on the observation deck of the new interspecies space station, looking out at the stars. Beside him, the rebel leader who had become a close friend joined him, her feathers now a symbol of peace and unity. "Do you think we'll ever truly achieve lasting peace?" she asked, her voice soft. Daniel nodded slowly. "I believe we can. We've taken the first steps, and as long as we remember the lessons of our past, there's hope." The stars twinkled in the vast expanse of space, a reminder of the countless worlds and lives that depended on their continued efforts. Together, they would face whatever challenges lay ahead, united in their determination to build a future where all species could coexist in harmony. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel. For every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time. 40.